just want to do God's will.
What you're seeking is a blessing from God.
You must expect a miracle.
You have the power of choice.
Believe on the Lord Jesus Christ.
So you can tell it's Monday. I started on a shot of myself instead of the open there. But great to have you guys here. Most of you wouldn't see that. I'm Randy Robinson. This is Life Today. It is live, and things happen, and that's the beauty of it. Chat is open, by the way, if you're watching this live. Obviously, in the replay, you missed it, and we invite you noon Central Time to join us live. But if you can't make it, that's great. We just appreciate you watching. Today, we're going to hit a topic that I've always just think is important. For all sorts of reasons, whatever spectrum of some of the theological, ideas that you may come from, I think we can agree that as a nation and as the right thing to do, that America should support Israel as a nation, shining light of democracy over there. Most people don't realize how many Arabs live in Israel peacefully. This is sort of the world we want, It's not perfect, so you can always find something, but neither is America, neither is Canada, neither is Australia. But we are on a path towards improvement, and I think that's important. So today we're going to have an interesting conversation, kind of catch you up on some things that are going on. And I've got Luke Bray from an organization called Passages Israel, and we'll tell you a little bit more about what they do in particular. But Scott Phillips was on last year talking about, our relationship with Israel as far as the church and the United States as a government. And I'm excited to have Luke Bray on, to have someone from Passages back on. I want to give you a brief little background because, frankly, I'm quite impressed by his resume. Right now, he's the Vice President of Strategic Partnerships and Growth for Passages Israel. We'll talk about that. But he served in Iraq in the United States Army, so he's a veteran. He is an adjunct instructor of global studies at Boyce College. He's got a Master's of Divinity with a concentration in Islamic Studies. He's got a THM, and I'm not sure what that is. Is that a theological Master's in Christian Missions or something? Master's of Theology, Luke?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And a PhD. We know what that is. In World Religions from Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. So this is someone who has a wealth of training, knowledge, and experience. And so, Luke, it's great to have you on Life Today Live. Appreciate you being here, man.
Thank you, Randy. It's good to meet you. Glad to be here.
Let's set up and talk a little bit. I hear news stories about this thing going on at a college campus, or this attack happening in New York City or something against a Jew, and unfortunately, there are some people that have been elected to Congress that say some pretty god-awful things about the nation of Israel. And I just go, what's going on? It seems like things really go bad when anti-Semitism starts to increase in a country. Just historically speaking, I'm just saying. That could be a bad sign. Is it really rising in America, you think, right now?
Oh, definitely. I think we've seen that rise over the last 5 to 10 years, but I think most of the time people are either one, they're kind of sheltered from it. They don't really think about it on a regular basis, or when they do see the headlines, they quickly go past it to look at something else that maybe is a little bit more interesting or a little bit more close to them, so to speak. And so I think the boiling points, if you will, of the actual physical attacks are really just kind of a symptomatic problem that happens with all of the issues that are going on underneath. So I think anti-Semitic feelings are increasing, or have been increasing over the last several years, and then they kind of spark out in these various attacks, which are maybe they're verbal attacks, or maybe they're physical attacks like we've seen in Colleyville, or at the Tree of Life Synagogue, or in other places. And so I think that when you look at the statistics, even the statistics kind of bear it out for us. On one particular report that was published in 2021, American Jewish Committee's State of Anti-Semitism in America, it's reporting from kind of a Jewish perspective. So Jews that have been polled, this is kind of the sentiment that they have and what they're feeling. and it reported that 90% of Jews said that they believe that anti-Semitism is a problem. And so I think that's a really significant number. So coming from a Jewish perspective, they believe that anti-Semitism really is an issue and something that needs to be addressed. And you go on and look at in other sources like the Pew Forum, which is another research firm, and it says, I quote them, more than 9 in 10 U.S. Jews say that there is at least some anti-Semitism in the United States, including 45% who say that there is a lot of anti-Semitism. And so that's coming from two different resources there. But 82% of American Jews say anti-Semitism has risen over the last 5 years. So like really fixating on that last five-year point. And I think one of the most interesting things is that only 44% of the general public believes that that is really the case. And so I think that's where you end up seeing some of the disparity, even that you were mentioning, is that, do people, the general public, believe that this is a significant problem? It seems like 44% seem that they don't think that it really is, while the 82% of Jews really see this as a mounting issue that they're having to face on a day in and day out basis. So whether it's perception that they have from something that somebody says or something someone calls them, or any other kind of stereotypical problem. I mean, the way I think of anti-Semitism is pretty, I guess, pretty basic. But anti-Semitism is a bias or prejudice which promotes negative stereotypes about the Jewish people, and we've seen that throughout history. It's a process of dehumanizing a person, and even rejecting their basic rights, human rights, or even rights when you talked about Israel for self-determination, something like that. I
think the public, American public, gets a little victim weary, and so when we hear people, complaining about being victims of, I don't know, some microaggression or somebody called me a name or whatever, and you're going, everybody has dealt with that on some level. Obviously, minorities in any community are going to deal with it on a much higher level. Mexicans are going to feel it here in Texas, unfortunately. And there's a lot of different reasons for that, none of them good. But I think we tend to dismiss one-offs, okay, well, someone was attacked, someone was mugged, they happen to be of X group, therefore X group wants to say, oh, we're under assault, right? But at the same time, the thing that makes me go, I'm concerned about the anti-Semitism in particular, because I'm hearing it at higher levels. I'm hearing it from professors. I'm hearing it from people in Congress. I'm hearing it from elected leaders in different cities, this idea that Israel is an oppressor, that the Arabs over there are mistreated. And the reality is just not the same. Not that again, you can find a victim here or there of anything, anywhere. But overall, Israel is very tolerant, is very accommodating, surprisingly, frankly, given what they've been through in the last century. Is there something going on in the West that is allowing for this just poisonous idea of anti-Semitism to become a little more socially accepted, do you think?
Well, I think that there's a lot of things that are probably happening in the West. One of the things we've seen over the last 10 to 20 years on college campuses is just a changing of the narrative to supplant Israel in a lot of ways. And what you end up seeing is, even the movement of BDS, boycott, divest, and sanction, right? That's a movement that is oftentimes kind of it's shown as a grassroots movement, but it actually is doing some real damage to, I think, the perception of Israel in the United States. And even as you mentioned, the professors or tenured professors that are really kind of championing some of these ideas are placing Israel in a crosshairs that doesn't necessarily need to be in. Now, as you said earlier, Israel is a country, and the United States is a country, Canada is a country, and every country has its own issues, and no country's perfect, right? And so we can't say everything that Israel does is perfect and always right. But what we do notice is that Israel as a country is really the only significant democracy in the Middle East.
Yeah.
And as you even mentioned, they have a tremendous amount of diversity even within the state itself. Mm-hmm. And the way that they treat minorities is one of the things that Passages wants to help students be able to engage with. And so as we take students on educational tours to Israel, we allow them the opportunity to interact with minorities. And so I apologize for the dinging. And so we allow them to interact with these minorities, whether they're Christians or Muslims living in the land of Israel.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about that, and I'll put the website up there for people that are interested. Passagesisrael.org. It looks like this, and you know what Luke and what his organization does, in large part, is to take students, mainly Christians, to Israel. Are you doing this more as this is the land where Jesus walked kind of tour, or is it more contemporary? Or are you encompassing all of that? Give us an idea of exactly what the approach is for you guys.
No, absolutely. So we have two major objectives that we kind of promote as an organization. But let me kind of back up just a little bit to give a little bit of an illustrative framing, I think, that will be helpful. There's a lot of different organizations that do pilgrimages to Israel, right? They're all over the place. Christians go to Israel and they look at the holy sites, the biblical sites, all of the archaeology, all of this. And it's an amazing experience. They come back, their life's changed. God does something really tremendous there while they're in the land. And they come back with a very different outlook on the scriptures and their own Christian life. All of that is extremely positive. Now, imagine if you and I were to walk into an old home, and when we walked in, we sat down in the living room and there was this amazing coffee table. Coffee table was probably made in the 18th century. It's out of mahogany wood, absolutely gorgeous, handcrafted. Everything is just really ornate. And we looked at it, we talked about it, maybe we thought about the history together and how many coffee cups have been set on this table in this, couple hundred years, right? And then we just kind of got up and left the house without ever talking to the people that actually lived in the home. And so many times that is what pilgrimage tours look like. And so what Passages wants to do is obviously take students to see the holy sites, to see these places that will really change the way that they understand the Bible and read it. But we also want them to be able to interact with the people that are living there today. And so that includes Jewish people, that includes Palestinian Muslim people, that includes Palestinian Christians, that includes a lot of these minority groups, so that they can have a full orbed understanding of what's actually taking place in Israel today. So the first thing that we want to do is to strengthen Christian faith particularly among college students in the United States. And why we think that is so important is that so many times what happens is college students, particularly when they come out of high school, going into college, Christian students, either one, they will kind of table their faith for 4 years and just kind of, not really do anything with it, not really be engaged, not grow as a follower of Jesus, or they'll just completely jettison it altogether. And we see that happening, especially among millennials and Generation Z. And so Christian students really need to have that foundational kind of encounter that we believe by taking them to Israel, they can have in a really strong way. And so strengthening Christian faith and identity among the next generation of Christian leaders is really, really important to us as an organization. And so that's the reason we want to take them to Israel to have this kind of empowered encounter with God. But then also, even just reflecting on the backdrop of all of the things that we're talking about today, Christians ought to be building bridges of friendship with the Jewish people and with the people that live in Israel today. And we see some really, really dire statistics when it comes to the friendship between Jews and Christians. And I mean, if you think about it in the backdrop of the last 2,000 years, the relationship between Jews and Christians has been really, really dark. From the early days to the Middle Ages, to, even you think about Europe in the last 100 years, some really devastating encounters between Jews and Christians. And the Jews are usually, if not always, the ones who come out on the side where there's brokenness and harm and hurt. And so we want to build those bridges back as an organization. And when you look at what's actually happening in the United States, I was mentioning earlier about some statistics. One of the reports that I read actually reports that, this is from a Jewish perspective, they said that 71% of Jews believe that extremism on the liberal left represents an anti-Semitic threat. Now, that's really significant number, 71%. But then think about this. They also said that 86% of Jews say that extremism in the name of Islam represents an anti-Semitic threat. Mm-hmm. Now, that obviously kind of makes sense in our minds, but now this final number really is troubling, I think, for conservative Christians. And it says that 91% of Jews said that extremism from the conservative right represents an anti-Semitic threat. And so if you think about the way that Jews have thought about their relationship with Christians over the last 100 years, the conservatives were the ones who were doing terrible things in Germany, right? And so we have to really begin to think about, how is it that we interact with Jewish people, and how do we build bridges of friendship and understanding? And that, I think, that trend, or at least that perception of a trend, is something that Passages really wants to change.
Yeah, I mean, I would point out that conservatism in Nazi Germany was not conservatism in America.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. It's the perception, right?
Perception, so right? No, yeah, I think they're watching too much CNN. But yeah, let me ask you this, because as someone who understands history and who works there, I have to defer to your, in a lot of ways, authority on the matter. What the relationship between Christians and Jews, because look, both of us, I mean, not to excoriate an individual Australian actor, but, the idea that the Jews killed our Savior, we've all heard that nonsense. And I think most of us kind of shake our heads at that, going, that is not, that is a primitive way of thinking in a lot of ways, and really a poor, just a poor thought process.
Well, it's a very old anti-Semitic trope. Deicide has been continually brought back. It recycles.
It does.
And even now today, it's being used, honestly, among some who are very pro-Palestinian and very anti-Israeli, to promote Jesus as being a Palestinian, or would have been a Palestinian, or something to this
right. Even though last I checked, Bethlehem is in Israel today. But so here's my question for you. What do you see? Because you're working with a lot of Christian students, so they're coming right out of the homes, and now you're talking to them about Israel. Are you seeing that there's still is there a lot of anti-Semitism on the religious right anyway? What we would consider kind of conservative Christian upbringing? Are these students having to shake off, going, "Oh my gosh, my parents taught me that the Jews killed Jesus and we should hate the Jews," and yada yada yada? Or are they not bringing that baggage? Because I don't see it, but I'm not in the position you're in.
No, I think that that isn't something we really encounter that often.
Good.
Is conservative Christian home promoting anti-Semitic ideas.
Good.
But it's really, I think, the issue is more so that there's just no discussion whatsoever about Israel or the Jewish people. And so when they come to us, it's more of a blank slate. They don't really have a tremendous amount there to think about, unless they've maybe been to a public university where there's been anti-Israel protesting on campus or something like that.
Yeah.
And so I think more than anything, it's just a lack of knowledge, a lack of understanding for many students. And so one of the things that we have kind of a 4-phase program with Passages. The first phase of the program is an introduction course. And in that, we want to introduce them to the ideas of the Bible, because so many students come to us and maybe they grew up in a Christian home. Maybe they've grown up and been a believer for a little while. Maybe they've been involved in a campus ministry, but they still don't seem to have a lot of biblical literacy that one would hope for when thinking about engaging the land of the Bible. So we want to build that into the system so that when they actually get there, they have these, coat hooks to hang these ideas on, so that things don't just kind of pass off and fall from them. So that's one element. But then also we need to help educate them over the last 100 years worth of Middle Eastern history when it comes to Israel. And so giving them basic ideas, framework, dates, different things that have occurred, those are really critical too, in order to maximize what they can experience while on the ground.
Yeah. Well, kids are a blank slate because Americans don't think about anything but America. You know that. We are incredibly myopic, unfortunately. You mentioned also
we're often called the ugly American. Yeah.
Do what?
It's oftentimes why we're called the ugly American when we go places. When we travel internationally, we think everybody ought to be speaking English to us. Yeah.
Well, yes, of course. I mean, because what else would you speak? Yeah. There was a missionary that went to Mexico and encountered some, and he had never been out of his county in the South, and encountered some children in Mexico, and he remarked to his team leader, because these kids are so smart. The team leader's like, "What? Why do you say that?" He's like, "Look, they're like 4, 5, 6 years old. They're already speaking Spanish." It's like that's their native language, dude. Okay. Anyway.
Yeah.
Sidebar. You mentioned also the threat of radical Islam, and I'm curious what you're seeing now. The death to Israel chants coming out of Iran. I mean, do they really mean it? Is that just at high level government? Is that just them clinging to some tradition for political power? Where are we at? I mean, last I checked, they're still sending an incredible number of rockets into Israel out of one of their strongholds, Hezbollah or somebody, on either side of them. What's the situation in your mind when it comes to Muslims and Jews?
Sure. Well, I think let me kind of frame that out a little bit, because I think one danger that we have kind of looking at this situation is to lump Muslims all together as though they're monolithic, but there's so much diversity among adherents of Islam. And so I would want to estimate, and again, this is an estimation, that, a very small percentage, maybe 10% of Muslims in the world are radical Muslims, as one might call them, or Islamists. And so when you think about the grand scheme of things, Muslims, by and large, the vast majority are peace-loving people, and who are kind and compassionate and have a desire to live at peace with those around them. And so I think that's really important for us to remember when we, as Christians, kind of engage this space. Some of my closest friends, either from my time when I was in Iraq, serving among police officers in Baghdad, or my friendship with several people that worked on our base, incredible Muslim people, gentle, kind, loved their neighbors, really just wanted to live their life and take care of their family. And so I think that's important to note when you begin talking about Islam, and particularly talking about to radical Islam. Now, when it comes to Israel specifically, we know that there's a history here, and the anger or the frustration that is felt is not, it's not so much a theological, and what I mean is a theological debate that stretches back to Abraham, right? So many times Christians really want to amplify that. Really, the debate and the issues at stake are something that's more like 75 years old, 100 years old. And the relationship between the Jewish people and the Arabs around them, whether that's Palestinians or Jordan or Saudi Arabia or Iran. After the fall of the Ottoman Empire, you had what was perceived by the Arabs, an outside group coming in, taking land. There's a lot of discussion, a lot of debate that we could have about that, and even just kind of walking through some of that. But the main idea to take away from that is they were seen as an external group of people taking land from people that live there currently. Now, a lot of anger as a result takes place between the Arab peoples and the Jewish peoples, and there was violence on both sides in the very early days, and even to this day, there's violence on all the sides when it comes to this conflict. And so now you have an entrenched people that really have no other place to go. Palestinians living in the Gaza Strip, or the Palestinian people living in the West Bank. And they don't really have any place to go because none of the Arab countries have really stepped up to assist in really significant ways, whether that's Lebanon or Jordan or Egypt. They've taken some and helped some, but nothing really that has changed the narrative for the Palestinian people. And so as a result, there is this kind of all or nothing mentality when it comes to the way that Hamas, who typically operates and has political control in the Gaza Strip, but then also Hamas has some work that they're doing in the West Bank as well. But then you have the Palestinian Authority that is kind of involved in the governmental controls in the West Bank. And so all of those different tension points cause flares to arise between the state of Israel and then the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. And usually it occurs at different high holiday points when people get very involved and very excited and very angry, sadly. And we saw that even last year with the issues related to Temple Mount or to the Al-Aqsa Mosque. There was a lot of conflict, and as a result, lives were lost, missiles were fired, tremendous amount of damage was done.
So what do you, by the way, before you get angry about him saying most Muslims love peace, let me just remind you that my guest, Luke Bray, has his Master's of Divinity with a concentration in Islamic studies. So he's definitely looked at this, I think, harder than the average person by far. And you know what, I know you're right. But we like to create our boogeyman. We like to have devils to go after and enemies to fight, and that can get in the way. What do you teach the kids that you take over? That you think will lead to a better attitude, whether it's towards Israel or just people of other faiths in general, because Christians should be peacemakers. Someone once said, blessed are the peacemakers. But yet right. Sometimes we feel justified in some of our really wrong attitudes. What are you telling your kids when you take them on these trips to Israel and engage them in other cultures?
No, that's absolutely right. I mean, Jesus calls us into the kingdom, and it's a kingdom to make peace with those around us. And so what we do as an organization is we want students to not only interact with people, but hear from them. And so they hear from Israeli perspective, from their tour guide or from speakers, but they also hear from Palestinian perspective because they need to hear that narrative. And students are able to think through the facts and think through the narratives and be able to come to their own conclusions. But I think as an organization, what we want to do is we want to see people as made in the image of God. And so that's all peoples. Every single human being on this planet was made in the image of God. And that person deserves to have dignity and respect. So we desire for human flourishing, whether that person is Jewish or that person is Palestinian. And so there's a promotion of those kinds of concepts and those kinds of ideas. And so as a result, we stand and we oppose hatred wherever it is found. Hatred that goes toward Jews, anti-Semitic hatred, or what we oftentimes find is Palestinian hatred among some Christians. A decision to say that those people are other and those people are unredeemable, or those people are not worthy of the time. Yeah. And so we want to see people come together for peace. And so peace in the Middle East, I truly believe is possible, but I believe it's possible through a kingdom and through a king. And so we stand opposed to those kinds of ideas of hatred because every single person is made in the image of God. So
yeah, love it. All right, Luke, I appreciate your time. I appreciate your insight and what you guys do. If somebody wants to connect with Passages of Israel or with Passages Israel, what is the best way for them to connect?
Sure. Our website, www.passagesisrael.org, is a wonderful starting point there. And you can email info@passagesisrael.org, and we'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. So, Randy, it's really nice to meet you. Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. Again, I appreciate what you do. I appreciate the spirit in which you do it. To me, that's the biggest thing. And so thank you, sir. And thank you for your service.
Yes.
Appreciate you guys hanging out, watching. Check out the website. It looks like this, passagesisrael.org. If you've got an interest, get in touch with them. Or if you just, are interested in the peace, of being a peacemaker, this is our calling. And it doesn't matter. Jew, Gentile, Arab, Muslim, whatever, Buddhist. We're supposed to be people of peace, so let's do it. Again, passagesisrael.org. We'll see you again next time. Got a lot of great interviews lined up this week, so keep coming back. It'll be good. You'll enjoy it. We'll see you again next time. Right here on Life Today Live.
You don't have to go anywhere or see it in a
Crank
specific
up today. I
place.
hope you guys are enjoying that.
It is the believing of the heart. It is faith in God. You believe it, say amen.